Okay, just a sec. And we're live.
Good afternoon, Prynhawn da Ihigyd. My name is Jane Davidson and I'm chair of the Wales inquiry of the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. And so a very, very warm welcome to you all, whether you're joining us here on this sunny afternoon in Wales or whether you're picking this up later. We're going to have a really exciting session, I think, this afternoon. Often people, when they're talking about food and farming, are not concentrating specifically on opportunities around land. But land is a really important issue, a really, really important discussion. So this event this afternoon is provocatively titled Land Sparing versus land sharing. I always love a good versus because that sets up a good discussion. And I'm delighted that we have a superb panel to join us. So we're going to look at how land can be shared, bridging the gap between different land interests. And they might be agricultural, they might be wildlife, they might be ecosystem generation, they might be housing and leisure and tourism, and looking at how land delivers multiple benefits. We want to share learning from the experiences of farmers, from environmental bodies and the community projects and food and farming charities about the practicalities of sharing land and the kind of frameworks that might help. And we also want to engage attendees in supporting land sharing and mobilizing their networks towards further action. And I think what's really interesting for me as an organic smallholder in West Wales is this issue about sharing is actually critically important in the context of collaborating across sectors for greater purpose. And if we look now at issues around food systems, production, processing, distribution and consumption, human society and the natural environment are all part of the whole. And because food systems and ecosystems and human health are inextricably linked, the challenges we face can only be properly addressed when our food systems are designed with a whole system approach. And we had an earlier session in terms of launching the Wales report on the field guide for future generations in Wales. And we were looking at the fact that in Wales, we have a particular opportunity linked to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Act's directive to government and the public services to take long-term decisions, preventative decisions, to factor climate change into its thinking, to restore biodiversity, and a number of instructions both to government and the public services about the ways we move forward. And if we do want a food system that delivers on this, it needs to look at production gains, multi-cropping, where different crop species are grown in the same field are proven to give a yield lift to those crops. We need to look at protection for soils, protection for agricultural biodiversity, protection for watercourses, robust food systems that are more resilient to climatic and economic shocks. So if we can create together a real diverse range of benefits, that will be far more resilient in the context of climatic and economic shocks than the kind of intensive monocropping. But there's a way to go in how we move from where we are now and where we're going to go next. So before I introduce the panel, I'm just going to ask Sue Pritchard, also an organic farmer from Wales, who is director of the UK Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, to just say a little bit about the Commission's approach to land use. Sue.
Thank you, Jane. And as you say, we launched with great pleasure our Wales Inquiry report just a couple of hours ago, Wales's Field Guide for Future Generations, which we set out our programme for the next 3 years. But it's building on the work that the Commission's been doing for the last 3 years too. And in that report, in our report, 2019 report, our UK-wide report, we highlighted 3 critical issues that we see as fundamentally interconnected and interrelated. The first is that healthy food has to be everybody's business, and we need to level the playing field for a fair food system. The second is that farming can be a force for change, and we advocate a transition towards agroecology by 2030 as a nature-based solution to the triple challenges of farming for nature, for climate and for public health. But we also, amongst our recommendations, talk about countryside needing to work for everyone. And as part of that, we describe the opportunities for starting to think through more systems-wide land use frameworks. Now, Wales has already gone some way to doing the work on this, and as has Scotland. It's England that's actually the laggard, very much the laggard in these conversations at the moment. And we took some inspiration from the interconnected whole systems work that already happens in Wales in terms of making that recommendation. But what we advocate as part of our land use framework is, first of all, diversity and multifunctionality. Healthy systems are diverse systems. Monocultural systems are always more risky and more vulnerable to shock. So a diverse system is a healthier system. We need to go with the grain. We need to do things with the land that it's ecologically suitable for. So there's no point trying to grow, I don't know, tomatoes at the top of Snowdon. That's a slightly silly example. But actually, there are examples all around the country where farmers are trying really, really hard to make things grow where they're not well suited to grow, and having to do all sorts of additional things to the land, the soil, to try and make that work, and it simply doesn't. And from there we get all sorts of issues. So going with the grain of the land, and thinking also in terms of ecological systems and human systems. How do we integrate conversations for human needs and the culture of Wales in considerations of what we do with our land? So I'll get to say a lot more about that in the course of this conversation, I know, but it's absolutely central to our report that understanding how we think about and use our land, steward our land for now and for future generations is absolutely central to our programme of work.
Thank you very much, Sue. For those listening who haven't met Sue before, she is the Chief Executive of the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission and has over 30 years experience as a researcher, writer and consultant on leading change for more sustainable futures. But in our context particularly, she runs a small organic livestock farm in Monmouthshire, which is also home to a charity, the Silver Birch Foundation, which provide developments in the outdoors for disengaged young people. So this point about never just doing one thing, but always doing as much as possible with what's available. Yeah. I'm now going to introduce the rest of our panel, and I'll start with Alicia Miller, who runs Troedfryd Organics, an organic horticulture farm in West Wales, a small matter of miles up the coast from me. And she's also web editor of the Sustainable Food Trust. And she's been working very hard in the context of her time in Wales, because when you hear her speak, you'll realise that she doesn't come from Wales originally, even if she's adopted us. It's an absolute pleasure having her here and her contribution towards the Wales Real Food and Farming Conference. And she's part of the team of Food Manifesto Wales. Mark Lee farms just over the Welsh border in Shropshire on Green Acres Farm, licensed by organic farmers and growers who are our partners for this important event. And he works closely with the Welsh Grain Forum and is growing the oldest recorded Welsh milling wheat. So thank you very much, Mark. Hen Gymro was first collected by the plant breeding station in Aberystwyth in 1919. Mark's the director of Organic Arable and is part of two research projects, Living Mulch and Live Wheat, which are managed by the Organic Research Centre. Erica Thompson, our third panellist, is part of Rhyw Las, a One Planet development of 4 small holdings in Carmarthenshire, which gained planning permission in 2016. If you haven't heard of One Planet developments, Erica will tell you all about them. And she chairs the One Planet Council, a voluntary organisation dedicated to supporting and promoting One Planet developments in Wales and beyond. And our final panellist is Chris Blake, who has spent the last decade supporting community responses to climate change. He's a founding director of award-winning social enterprises, the Green Valleys and Community Energy Wales, and has been at the forefront of the movement for community-owned renewable generation, and is now looking at delivering a landscape-scale community stewardship of public land in the South Wales Valley. And is also a board member of Natural Resources Wales. So when you get your opportunity to put some questions into the YouTube chat, and any are heading towards the public sector, Chris, it's coming your way as the nearest thing as a non-exec of a public agency in Wales. But I think in tribute to our partners, the organic farmers and growers, Mark, perhaps we can start with you. And we've asked each panelist to just give an opening few remarks in terms of their relationship to the issue, what they feel about land sharing, and one thing that they've learned. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much for having me. I do apologise for being in Shropshire before we go any further. I'm very conscious of it and rather envious that I'm not in Wales, actually, having heard how much better you or how much ahead of England you are on this issue. I've no doubt that is the case. We are organic farmers. We farm about 450 acres in Shropshire of predominantly arable land. We've been organic 20 years, so we are just about leaving the beginners sector, I think, in terms of organic, and feeling that we're discovering a way forward for us. We have a very diverse system, deliberately diverse. Land sharing is fundamental to what we do. As you've said already, diversity is key in land sharing. Diversity is key to organic success. I have absolutely no doubt of that. It's automatic. We simply cannot control diversity once we're organic. We have to accept diversity of weeds for a start, insect life, invertebrates, everything else. The diversity is unavoidable in an organic situation. So we embrace that. That is fundamental to the success we feel, as is the diversity that it brings. Our land is mainly arable, as I said, so our cropping is diverse, although we do try and produce crops for sale, certainly for direct human food, as close to the market as we can. All our wheat is now specialist milling wheat, either old, ancient, heritage. Pengumru, as you said, is 100 years old, but we go older and newer than that for direct sale to millers and bakers, some of whom are in Wales. Our oats and peas are all grown for human consumption. And that's really becoming more and more of a focus for us, that we get closer to our market, and the market that responds to the land sharing that we do. As we've described, I've described the farm. We have a lot of stewardship activity on the farm. We create habitats. It's all part of not just the diversity and the resilience of our system, but also the PR of our farm. It's appreciated by local people and it's appreciated by our customers. So it would be completely illogical not to see it as having a value, both in terms of environment and in terms of our market. So that's it. The one thing, I think, an example of something that is a result of land sharing, of which I'm proud right now, is we've just been told that I have a young man that does bird counts for me. We have 8 corn bunting nests in the field just out there that I can see through my window. And I'm every bit as proud of that as I am of anything we grow or produce this year.
Mark, thank you so much. I mean, interestingly enough, I think that oddly enough, COVID has been a time that has brought your kind of growing and the local mills that have been able to carry on producing flour when the larger ones haven't, absolutely into the public eye. So I think there's a key message around diversity, opportunity, and resilience as well. And the longevity you've brought to this in terms of the old wheats and keeping them alive, and they're being part of modern and future learning about grains is absolutely fantastic. Can we move now to Alicia, please?
Yes, hi there. Nathan, my husband Nathan Richards and I run Troy-de-Roo Organics, which is a very much a small scale 23-acre mixed farm with a strong focus on horticulture. And we've been doing that now for about 12 years. We have very much as a kind of fundamental ethos of the farm, the idea of ecology. Nathan likes to tell a story about how when he was growing up in the 70s, he saw a bumper sticker that read "Ecology Now," and he wanted to understand what that meant. And that stayed with him in a kind of long and drawn out way, but it's really part of what led him into farming. And when he gets up in the morning, he says the things that he thinks about is where's the ecology. I think that's a really important thing in terms of land sharing and that kind of understanding of a holistic relationship with land. I think the other thing I wanted to say is, you know, when people come to the farm, one of the things that they can't help but notice is that it's very messy. You know, we do things like overwinter in weeds if we can't get our green manures in on time. We let our crops go to seed and leave them in the field so that birds have them. Our field margins are quite large. I think for us, it really is a distinction to be made in terms of ideas of efficiency and what efficiency means in farming. I think that's quite important to us, that's not a priority. This idea of efficiency, I think, which permeates you know, I think our whole thinking around the economy, but particularly the economy of farming, this idea that monetary and productive efficiency it's really a myth. We only have one planet. And if we take a kind of single species approach to managing it and only think about what's best for us, we're missing a part, you know, missing most of the bigger picture. And if we don't see ourselves as that, you know, as integral to that picture, you know, then we're really looking at the collapse of our species. So for us, I think it is really an imperative to think about land sharing and that very essential relationship that we have with the land. I think very much that messy inefficiency is beautifully efficient in a holistic whole, you know, planet perspective. And what's needed in farming is not carving out land for nature and have a separate land for farming, but actually to really fundamentally bring them together and develop that ecological relationship that farmers, I really feel it's critical, have to their land. And the most important part of being a farmer is being able to take care of your soil and having an enduring relationship with it. And that's really something that permeates the ethos of the farm. And I think we really have to keep in mind that it's very, very possible to farm productively in harmony with the wider ecosystem. We have a hugely diverse, rotational, mixed farm. And I think it's also very important that eschews the use of chemicals that are so profoundly damaging, even in small, precise amounts. And scale has to be considered. If you spend your day in huge tractors riding around vast fields, it's, you know, with one crop, I think it's hard to have that relationship with the land. And that's really critical. That's where I think we as farmers need to ensure that we step outside in a way of ourselves and always see and contemplate that wider perspective, which has to do with our relationship to the earth.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm just listening to that, and I was thinking that when I came first to this sort of agenda, it was very much around the 1992 Earth Summit and the first principle that humans have the right to live in harmony with nature. We don't have the right to abuse nature. We don't have a right to pretend we're better than nature. Nature is a fundamental aspect of all our lives, and we betray it at our peril. So all the way through the things you were saying when you were talking about, I want that bumper sticker, by the say. I think ecology now should be our strapline. But that whole thing about you know, about harmony and nature and humans, you know, we do have the one planet, and we've been extracting the benefits from it. So this is the opportunity to look forward. And you talked about scale, and you mentioned one planet. So clearly the next person is Erica, who is operating at the scale of a one planet development. Over to you, Erica.
Diolch, Jane. Dwi'n hapus iawn I fod yma heddi. So I'm Erica Thompson, and as Jane said, I live on a One Planet development here in beautiful Carmarthenshire, where my husband and I have a small holding that's part of a group of 4. We got planning permission in 2016 under the One Planet development policy. And as part of that, we have a small land-based business which produces honey, eggs, apple juice, vegetables, various other things. We've expanded quite a lot this year with the lockdown and the extra demand locally. So I'm also the chair of the One Planet Council, which is a voluntary organisation that exists to support and promote One Planet development and to kind of understand more about the benefits and share some of the stories from what we found to be the advantages of living in this way. So about One Planet development, it, as we were saying, it really takes land sharing as a cornerstone, because the aim of the planning policy is to create new ecological smallholdings that have a I mean, people say low impact, but I prefer to say positive impact. You know, that the land, the environment, the community should be better off for these One Planet developments existing than they would be otherwise. So that goes along with a detailed program of monitoring, and there is a long list of commitments that a One Planet development must sign up to. So we have to have a zero carbon house. This house is made of straw bales and timber. It has to have demonstrated ecological benefit, so we monitor biodiversity and report on that. We have to generate an income from the land to justify being on the land, and so that's the basis of our business, and our neighbours do many other diverse things as well. We have to monitor our ecological footprint. So that involves filling out a complicated spreadsheet every so often to say what we've spent money on, and add up the net impact of that and show that we are genuinely living within the One Planet level, using only our fair share of the Earth's resources. And we have to show a positive community benefit. So I think, you know, all of that really speaks to the land sharing question. And I suppose the unique aspect of One Planet development is the way that it is monitored in so much detail, and that we attempt to measure and find evidence for it each year. I suppose maybe something that doesn't come up so much is the sort of community impact of this. And I think the cultural importance of food and farming to Wales in particular is just so huge, that it's worth also talking a bit about that, and about the ways that these kinds of developments could support, for instance, the Welsh language. I mean, the rural communities really are crying out for young families, for jobs, for more kids in the schools. And these sorts of developments can really provide that. So I think that's it. You know, it's almost tangential, but I see it as being really important to the development of a food and farming strategy, to think about the ways in which it can support the cultural life of rural communities, as well as all of the other ecological and obviously the main agricultural benefits as well.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I think one of the things that, for those of you who are not familiar with One Planet developments, they were launched in Wales in 2010, actually launched at the Royal Welsh Show. So 10 years ago this week, they were launched at the Royal Welsh Show to farmers. And they, and if you want to read about them, because they are a planning policy in Wales, and therefore have regulatory backing, they're in TAN 6, the Technical Advisory Note 6 of the Welsh Planning Policy, which is the planning policy on rural development. So if you look up TAN 6 and you look up One Planet developments, you'll be able to find out what the requirements are. And I think what's notable, Erica, is in your contribution to the report, you make the point, which I think you make very well, which is those people who are trying to do One Planet development find the whole process very hard, and the requirement and the way in which you have to operate being monitored all the time, very onerous, and most people would like it to be less onerous. Those people who do not like one planet developments think there's somehow a very easy way of being able to build a house in the countryside, without understanding potentially that actually it cannot be done unless your commitment is for a zero carbon house and is to earn half your living off the land. But that actually, and I will come back to this later in terms of opportunities of land sharing, what is being grown or how the land is being used is so varied in One Planet developments. They actually provide models for elsewhere in Wales. And talking about models for elsewhere in Wales, I have to say a very exciting model that I have featured in my book behind me here is going to come up now from Chris Blake.
Nicely
because
positioned,
of
Jane.
his work
Very,
on
very nicely.
Skyline. Over to you,
Good
Chris.
product placement.
Product
Very
placement.
good.
Sorry about that.
Great product placement. Right now, so the Skyline project, which I've been working on for a couple of years, I suppose takes its inspiration from the land reform in Scotland, where communities have been owning and managing large chunks of the landscape. Something like 6% of the land area of Scotland is now managed by communities. And actually, in a way, listening to you, it's a little bit like the One Planet development. It's about a community, instead of individuals, but a community managing a landscape for ecological and economic and sustained long-term benefits. So it's very much the same idea, but at a larger scale. I've been looking specifically at community stewardship in the South Wales valleys, where the land around the towns is not farmland. It's typically woodland estate, it's high moorland, it's peat bogs, it's old coal tips. And how can that be done? And we got engaged in doing a lot of feasibility study, talking to 3 communities in the valleys about asking them the question, if you could manage this landscape, how would you do it? What would you do with it? Are you interested in it? Do you want to manage it? Or should we just let the forestry guys run it as they currently do, which is really about maximizing economic returns. And we got some really fascinating results from that process. It was a long engagement right across the community. 2 things really stood out. One was that the older generation, people over 70, well over 70, they passionately cared about what that future landscape would look like. And when I say long term, I mean about 100 years, 3 generations, the kind of luxury of planning which only traditionally large family estates can enter into. And you were getting 75 and 80-year-olds who really cared what the valley, how it would be managed and what it would look like in 3 generations' time, which was quite exciting. The other thing that really shone through, and maybe it seemed like a surprise, but maybe it isn't a surprise, the people who live in a place they naturally balance the competing objectives. It's like it's what the Wellbeing Act is all about. They don't want to just maximize income from forestry. So some people were telling us, if a community managed this forestry, they cut down all the trees, they maximize the income, and they spend it on something. No, that's absolutely not what they want to do. Yes, they want economic opportunities. They want income from the forestry. They want that forestry to maximize local jobs and local income and local economic development. But equally, they want a better home for nature. They want biodiversity improvements. They want access to the woodlands for education, for cultural activities, for fitness. They want to see the landscape used as a carbon sink better than it is at the moment. Other benefits like flood prevention became very relevant in the first quarter of this year, where some of those valleys communities, some of the ones we've been consulting in, were suffering from flash flooding running off of recently cleared clear fell forestry. And so that was the work. So there's a natural, and I suppose my message is that what I found is that people who live in a place can be trusted to be the stewards of that landscape for the long term, much better than people who may not live in a place but get an economic return from it. And it's really my message really is about trusting local people to be the stewards of that landscape for the long term, and they will make some really passionate decisions about how best to do it.
Chris, thanks so much. I mean, a couple of things that really struck me there was around becoming trusted stewards. And although if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll only see an individual speaker, I've got the gallery view, and because I've got the gallery view, I saw a nod from every person. And I just wonder if we could look at this idea of being trusted stewards, because that's not about ownership. That's about management or engagement or relationship. Mark, I wonder if I could come back to you. You've talked about the success of land sharing, particularly also in the context of bird rearing in your own environment. What if you were able to influence a Welsh agriculture bill, because there is an agriculture bill coming in Wales, and the timing of this particular discussion is perfect because the agriculture bill will be a white paper before the election. We have a Welsh general election in May next year. And then I think whichever party comes in, there will need to be an agriculture act afterwards in the context of Brexit. So the opportunity is there for Wales to do whatever it wants in this context, subject to constraints the UK government might try and put on it, but we'll ignore those for a moment. But the opportunity is there for Wales to be really imaginative in the context of approaches. So I'm going to ask you all about what in the context of land and this notion of land sparing, land sharing, might you think about in terms of a proposition to put into an agriculture bill? I mean, we can assume that the white paper will probably not address these issues, but it'll be our opportunity in response to that so that we can make this conversation important in terms of galvanizing other thoughts and ideas. Mark, may I start with you?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I will do my best. One of the things we've done what we've done in spite of the circumstances we work in here, and the schemes that are available. We join schemes, but to be honest, we do more environmental work outside of schemes than we do under schemes. So we operate because we want to do it. And I think the critical thing about the environmental output of our farming is that we are motivated to do it because we believe in it rather than we are funded to do it. And there's always a thing in agri-environment schemes, there always seems to me to be, it comes at it from the perspective of compensating farmers for the losses they will incur for giving way to nature in some way. And that sets completely the wrong tone in my view, that income foregone should be compensated. All the people that I know that are successful in environmental work do it because they believe in it. And I think we all have the potential to believe in it. It's largely, maybe it's a cultural thing, and I obviously speak from an English perspective, but perhaps it's less so in Wales, but from a cultural point of view, farmers, young farmers, farming education comes from the standpoint that farming output is all about output and yield. And that is somehow at odds with environmental work and stewardship, good stewardship of land. For me, it would be, and I'm probably not answering your question at all here, I apologise, but it would be not to pursue a model which sees environmental work as somehow antagonistic with farming output and therefore something that needs to be compensated for, but something that we should see as fundamental to our farming. I think information and education of young farmers and farming folk, I say young farmers because I'm thinking there of colleges, but farming people, the more aware we are of what we do, the more aware. I didn't know I had 8 corn bunting nests until the young lad that does my bird counting told me, and I would never have known that. We only learned what a corn bunting song is about 8 or 9 years ago. So in the lack of that understanding and information, I think we just don't feel the motivation. So if that is a useful contribution, I think farmers need to be made or to be helped to learn about the potential, the environmental potential of where they live and where they work. And then they will become motivated to do it, which is immensely more powerful than any compensatory payment.
So in a sense, you're talking about incentivization rather than income foregone. And I think your point about the skills acquisition is critical. I mean, I certainly know that if we think about the whole kind of climate change debate, there are now young people writing curricula to suggest to go into schools because the the kind of national curriculum has not caught up. And I think that quite often, having worked in an education sector for a long time, because of all the validation and moderation any courses go through, they're always, in a sense, inherently out of date by the time they're delivered. And then it's imaginative teachers who bring them up to date. But there is a dislocate, isn't there, between how people are trained with a focus on efficiency outputs. So I want to come to you then, Alicia, because of the fact that, you know, you talked about efficiency, and there's a different kind of efficiency in terms of creating something industrial which has a cost, and an efficiency which actually maximizes or optimizes all aspects, isn't there?
Yes, and I mean, I think, and that's the kind of, you know, sort of change of thinking that needs to happen. It needs to move into a wider frame, and a frame that does just that, that encompasses a kind of world, a planet view. Because, you know, as I did say, it's, you know, this idea that productivity and monetary efficiency is so important. That means nothing if we don't have a planet that is healthy and thriving and you know, alive. So I think we have to kind of change our perspective. I was going to say in response, I couldn't agree with Mark more on a number of the things he said, but I really feel in relation to bringing young people into farming, that's one of the things, you know, I've been involved in conversations around how we expand horticulture in Wales, and that really means more young people coming into horticulture. And we need to, what I find is that if young people are engaged with the wider environmental issues of the world that they're, you know, growing into, they are more likely to want to get involved in land work. And I think that's something we really need to foster. There was a discussion I was involved in about the commercial horticulture sector, and how you get people, young people involved in that, in something that's going to involve a lot of really hard physical labor for an extended period of their life. And again, it's like you have to have the ethos there. It's that ethos that's going to engage them, because they want to be a part of the solution. They want to do things differently. They want to you know, move us forward. And I think that's really critical in terms of that engagement with land work.
I'm really grateful for that. I mean, two things I immediately thought of. One in the context of young people was that also on today's agenda is a really heartwarming video from Gerald Miles about his community supported agriculture project, with a lot of young people who were woofers, you know, young people who come to work on an organic farm periods of time in the summer, etc. And it is delightful because he talks about this as a kind of like shared happiness and a sort of shared understanding of the relationship between humans and the soil. So I think this notion about bringing young people back in touch with food is actually critically important part of this agenda. And I think if I can move over to Erica now, Erica, one of the things I've really noticed in terms of the One Planet developments, because I must have visited most of them now to have a look at how they're getting on, and a lot of you have young families, and your young families are integral to that. And in fact, I think the picture associated with you in the report is it your daughter holding a couple of beetroot enthusiastic.
My son, yes, that's right.
Oh, it was your son. I just saw it was a child.
Yeah, the younger one. Yeah.
But it was just that you know, just that whole thing about the relationship that your children are having, that my generation didn't have, because in a sense we were the first generation to move away from the land.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, picking up on those points of efficiency as well, about bringing people back. You know, if we're striving to be efficient in a monetary sense, then you are striving to reduce the number of people hours on your farm, on your holding, and to because that costs money. and to go for mechanization and intensification, etc. But every time you do that, you're reducing the labor inputs, and of course you're then reducing the number of jobs that the land itself is supporting. So yes, totally. And I mean, of course, one of our personal reasons for wanting to be here is to wanting to develop that kind of connection for our kids as well. I mean, it feels absolutely wonderful for them to have that direct connection with the land right outside the door. And it's something that, you know, it comes back to what I was saying about that, the life in the countryside as well. I think that life in the countryside, because we have the ability to support ourselves here, and because we have the ability to make these new small holdings, then, you know, then the kids are growing up in this environment. They're going to the local school, they're learning Welsh in the local school, they're part of the local rural community. And I think that's, you know, that's absolutely at the heart of what One Planet development is and should be. And then the other thing I wanted to say on this, I suppose, was that, you know, One Planet development with the aim of using one planet's worth of resources. Obviously, the aim is for all of Wales to be a one planet nation, and ideally for the whole of the planet to be a one planet planet. Not going to work if we're a 1.8 planet, is it? You know, I think we have to see One Planet development and the, you know, not the paperwork that goes with it, but the principles that go with it as being something that we must hope to extend, you know, to all of what we do, not just food and farming, but every new development and every activity. We should be thinking of these One Planet principles in what we're aiming to do. And I think, you know, when you start thinking about it that way, maybe you say, well, actually, One Planet development is really the minimum acceptable. It's not the vanguard and the leader, it's the minimum acceptable standard, because one planet is all we've got. If we were 0.9, it would be even better. If we were 0.7, it would be even better. We should be using as little of those resources we can in order to free it up for future generations, for wildlife, for nature, for other people. So I think I thought I'd just throw that in, thinking about ways that these ideas can contribute.
It's very interesting you say that, because of course, actually, when the forerunner of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act was proposed, it was in the spirit of ensuring that Wales only used one planet worth of resources. So that principle is already established in government. I think government needs some help on which to deliver that. But if we, in the context of an agriculture bill, would you have a specific recommendation around the extension of One Planet developments, or what needs to happen in the next stage?
Well, I think the ideas need to be extended. I think what we've seen so far is that there's quite a limited scope or imagination around what kinds of One Planet developments can look like. So we've mainly seen single small holdings, 5 to 10 acres, mostly in the former Dyfed region, mostly you know, relatively small scale horticulture. But of course, you could imagine completely different models of One Planet development. You could take advantage of the same policy as an upland sheep farmer on, you know, 200 acres or more. You could take advantage of the policy to create a community supported agriculture, to create a zero carbon home for the grower, maybe on a leasehold basis each year, for different growers, make that available as part of a larger scheme. Or you could think about a larger One Planet kind of housing development, if you like, on the edge of a settlement, thinking about how that settlement within itself can meet the One Planet requirements, but not necessarily requiring every single household to do so individually. So I think I would be looking to, you know, move away from the stereotype, if you like, of One Planet development as being a single small holding in the middle of nowhere, and look for imaginative ways that it could be applied elsewhere in different contexts. And I think, you know, we've got to think about taking away some of the bureaucracy, because if we want, it's clearly off-putting to many people to have to fill in all these monitoring reports. And obviously it's done with the best of intentions and people fill it out to the best of their ability. But in order to make it happen, and to make it happen more, then reducing the paperwork around it somehow has got to happen.
Lovely, thank you very much. I remember somebody telling me that the worst kind of efficiency is to be a bean counter, and then I said, well, of course, if you have a one planet development, you definitely have to count your beans. so
we haven't quite counted
not
them
the
in
best
detail,
approach.
we weigh them occasionally.
Yeah. Sue, just in the sense of taking your chief executive hat off at the moment, in the context of your role as a Monmouthshire organic farmer, you know, we always have time, those of us who spend a lot of time outside doing a lot of digging, weeding, planting, growing seedlings, etc., composting, to sort of think about the kind of world we want to live in. So what might you want to put in? And I'm sort of separating you from the Commission for a moment, because obviously the Commission will have a view in due course on what it might want to suggest in an agriculture bill. But what might you, organic farmer in Monmouthshire, might want to ask an agriculture bill to do around land? Because we want to keep this discussion focused on land.
So I'm a livestock farmer, and I do a bit of growing, but that's for our home use. So mainly when I'm walking around, I'm patting a Hereford cow on its bottom or pulling a lamb out of a hedge. But I did go for a walk last night after, you know, a long day in the office, and I was just so thankful to be able to do that at this time under these circumstances. But I went for a walk around my wild spaces. So we're an organic permaculture farm here at Llananant, and that means we leave a lot of space for nature, and we let wild spaces flourish around the edges of our farm and through the corridors, the riparian corridors, the streamside corridors, as well as the hedgerows that we've put in and created. And so the first thing I'd say is that there's room for wild spaces, there's room for nature on every single holding in some form or another. And it's a great joy to spend time in that. I was listening, we've got fledglings everywhere. And so just, you know, listening to the fledglings in the woodlands on the edge of my land, the ancient coppice woodlands at the edge of my land, is just an absolute joy. So like Mark, having that just deep pleasure at being part of nature as well as part of growing healthy, sustainable food is really, really important. I think the other thing that I would want to say as a farmer is very often I find the language of subsidy very upsetting, actually, and because other industries don't have that language applied for them. There's a kind of undertow that, and Mark touched on this in the income foregone point that he was making, there's a kind of undertone that farmers are somehow being subsidised in a way that's not good for all of us. And yet food and our landscape and our natural world is pretty fundamental. We can probably manage without an accountant for 12 months or so, and if we're lucky we can manage without, you know, even doctors and nurses, but we will not go a day without food, without it having, you know, real damage and impact on our physical selves. And so I prefer to talk about investment in a whole system. So when we talk about the replacement scheme for the Common Agricultural Policy, I would like to see us using the language of investing in the whole food and farming system and in nature in order to direct our public money, our taxpayers' money, towards those things that really, really matter to us. And that then includes things like making sure that young people have access to that land too, because that's really important job creation. And I think too that the true cost of food production needs to be fully taken into account. So it should not be beneficial. And again, so I speak here as an organic farmer, it should not be more expensive for me to do less compared to some of my neighbours who get more yield by chucking more chemicals on their ground. And that it shouldn't work in the way that it does at the moment. The full cost of the impact of intensive farming must be incorporated into the price of that food, so that it does not cost more for me to farm more sustainably as it currently does. So those are the sorts of things that I think about when I go for a wander round my fields at the end of the day. But I also think they're incredibly doable in the context of an agriculture bill. And I sense it is the direction of travel that that the minister's already starting to think about. It just feels really, really important at this point to recognise that an agriculture bill needs to be understood with a land use framework, with a food strategy, and also with a green recovery, so that we are investing in the kinds of work that young people want to do, and older people now who are going to be without work coming out of the coronavirus crisis, the kinds of work that people want to do, but actually we need them to do. You know, the kind of work the world needs right now, which is in sustainable food and in our natural ecosystems. And I might just have to go on mute because that's my geese coming to join the conversation.
Thank you. Well, I had to close my window because the tractor's making hay in the field next door. We have lots of questions, and actually, Chris, I was going to come to you to ask you what you'd like to see in an agriculture bill. And I was interested that, Lucy Taylor from Social Farms and Gardens is talking about more supportive planning policy for more small-scale farming and funding for local authorities that lease land to enterprises or projects that are community-led. Now, in the context of Skyline, it's beyond leasing of land, isn't it, in the traditional sense? But I mean, partly we wanted you in this mix here because we can think as radically as we potentially want about land sharing arrangements.
Yeah. I was struck when Erica was talking about the constraints on the One Planet developers. We were talking earlier about trusted stewardship. It's the lack of trust. The One Planet stewards are not trusted and have to fill in all these forms, and it's a nature of that. And the communities in the Rhondda that want to become stewards of the landscape, they're having to prove so that they can be trusted. There's an assumption of lack of trust against individuals with very good intentions, which we need to be aware that we're doing it. I'm going to throw in a it's a bit late in the conversation, but I'm going to throw in an idea which I've been playing around with for a while. I spent 10 years in the renewable energy sector, and the renewable energy sector, the energy sector has a very clear trilemma. It has to have cheap energy, it needs secure supply, but it also introduced, once we signed the carbon commitments, we had to have low carbon, and policy has to balance those three things. And one of the things we did with that was we introduced the feed-in tariff and the renewable obligations, and the UK government invested £10 billion over 10 years in what was in small scale and distributed renewable generation. You use that in a food context. That was for a generator of local electricity, for that electricity that is used locally, they were given a production subsidy, a feed-in tariff. And I just wonder whether we couldn't do the same thing for food. So Sue's point about getting the others to pay for the externalities would be better, but that probably isn't going to happen in the short term. So what if we, if a farmer, if we had a food trilemma of trying to balance cost, security, and low carbon or good practice, let's pay local food producers who produce for the local market a premium, and we can do that through VAT rates on certain products in supermarkets, or we can do it from general taxation. Let's just do it for 10 years and use that funding to invest in new processes and new practices and new ways of educating and managing the land. So it's taking the experience from the energy sector, which was incredibly successful. So in 2009, renewable energy was 6% of UK electricity production. Last year, it was 39%. It transformed the sector. £10 billion over 10 years, production subsidy, transformed the sector. I'd like to explore doing that with food in Wales.
That's a really interesting proposition. How does everybody else feel?
I think it's a brilliant idea, and at the risk of stealing Erica's brilliant suggestion in the chat between the panelists. She's saying, of course, we could call it the feed-in tariff, and of course we could, seeing as the rest of them have gone. But actually, it's a really, really good point, well made, because it is also building on what we know works in other transition movements. Government needs to step in to create the conditions through which those transitions can take place. It takes more investment. It takes upfront investment for that to happen. Energy is an absolutely clear case in point, but there are others. And if we stop talking about subsidising farmers and investing in a sustainable food system and land use framework, then that opens up all sorts of possibilities for bringing in not just public money, but actually lining up private investment behind that too, because there are many private equity funds and other investors who really want to be doing the right thing and directing their own resources towards doing the right thing and providing the right framework for that to happen, the right conditions for that to happen could be absolutely transformative.
Yeah. Can I just pick up one other question? There are a number of questions in the chat which sort of link to things like permitted development frameworks and structures. And I think that taking Chris's point, which I once again saw sort of universal nods to, about the fact that because people who are trying to live within a one planet framework are not trusted by a system that has actually always been going in the opposite direction, they have had to jump through a lot more hoops. And if we can turn this round to an agriculture bill predicated on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, the hoops should be entirely the other way. The hoops should be all around extractive economies, all around the industrialized base, all around the use of fertilizer, etc. So to really, I mean, if we, for the purposes of this discussion, stay in the what if in terms of the art of the possible, I think one of the people who've come in has said that actually we offshore 80% of our forest product footprint, and there's been no new large-scale timber producing woodlands planted in Wales for 30 years. Why is timber being ignored? Now, Sue, surely timber has to be a major part of this. The First Minister made a commitment to a national forest as well. So where do we see the other kind of land uses outside food in this context that can be used for building and everything else?
And that's exactly why we need a land use framework in the way that we've been talking about here and what we propose in our report, because, you know, building on what Chris was saying, it is really, really important to trust communities, to know what the right thing is and to do the right thing in their communities. I'm really uncomfortable about the kind of land use strategy that says, let's plonk woodland over here. Frankly, we have experiences in Wales of big ambitious schemes just not landing well with the communities that they were going to impact. And we have to learn from that because the challenges that they were trying to deal with are still there. So it is important that we plant more trees, absolutely it is. And it is important that we understand the role of forestry and other fibres as integral parts of a more sustainable future. But where we plant and what we plant and how we plant has to be part of a kind of mutually respectful conversation with a national framework, but really good local and citizen engagement, community engagement from the ground up, so that it works for everybody.
Right, okay, so we've got something that finishing, that's a very good finishing line, working from the ground up so it works for everybody. So I think the messages from this panel at this session are that we need the facility to totally change the parameters of the debate. We need to have a new paradigm that recognises all the impacts heading our way and only rewards those people who are dealing with them, and that land sharing has an enormous role to play in the context of that, and that the diversity of that land sharing is limited potentially by our imagination, but it has to be around humans living in harmony with nature. that first principle from the UN. So may I thank you all hugely. I know there's a lot of interest in nature-based solutions. We could have gone there, but there's a whole day on that later in the week. So can I thank you all so much for joining this debate. I think we didn't really talk about land sparing, but we are huge advocates of land sharing. And anybody out there who wants to contribute with ideas that you might want to see carried out, let's go for some really big ideas to be carried out. Contact the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, ffcc.co.uk. Put your ideas in there, because that way you can be sure that the Commission will look at them. And I look forward to a long and successful relationship with the organic farmers and growers. And I hope, Mark, that if all goes to plan, we can make you really jealous for not living in Wales. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn I gyd am ddod heddiw. Pob hwyl.